Hello, everyone. Sorry that I've been missing in action the last couple of days. I've been taking time off because of this cold that I have, and I'm still coughing and hacking at this point, which is making recording these rather difficult. So, looking at this last week, one of the things I want to go back and touch on, even though there'll be like two videos in a row, is the immigration crisis. Now, I recorded the last video before Trump signed his executive order, and I really didn't cover everything I really wanted to in that video, but I thought it was long enough. So let's take a look at this. So one of the things that I think is important is the rule of law. And in this case, I don't like to see executive orders used to get around making proper legislation. I would much rather have seen them go and legislate this, and they might still do that at this point, and I really hope they do, because that would be a permanent solution to the problem. Right now, as it stands, the executive order is simply a band-aid, and we've been band-aiding this crisis for a long time. Now, that being said, solutions other than, just reuniting families, whatever, that doesn't solve the immigration crisis. It's just sort of like handling the situation currently on the ground. It doesn't actually change things. And so what would change things? Well, honestly, I think both parties actually have a better solution than the current system that we have. Not that I'm totally in favor of one or the other, but blanket amnesty or blanket deportation, either one of those is a better solution than the kind of muddy waters that we find ourselves in currently. Certainly allowing people to stay who have children causes an incentive for people to bring children, and not just parents either. Like if a child is your ticket to staying here, why not kidnap someone's child that's too young to talk and bring them here against their will and just claim that they're your own child? I mean, and that's aside from sex trafficking or other problems. I'm sure you can tell that I'm still stuffed up, so this video is going to be kind of rough, and I do apologize for that. So in either case, I think that's why part of the thing about separating parents, separating adults who bring children from the children that they bring in order to verify things, isn't the worst thing in the world. And this is really one of those situations that can be claimed either way. Like, the left is obviously running the narrative right now with oh, it's horrible, they're putting them in detention camps. But you could also turn around and say, like they've tried to, and say, oh, well, it's like a camp or a daycare we're providing, homes and, or shelter and food and services to these kids, and they are. It might not be as nice as, a middle income, apartment or house or something, but it's better than nothing. I mean, otherwise, what would you do? I mean, honestly, I touched on that in the last video. What would you do with a bunch of people coming here? You've captured them. What are you going to do? You've got hundreds, if not thousands of them. They have 2,000 kids. You can't just rent them each a nice studio apartment in the good part of town. You're gonna have to be efficient and deal with this as best that you can with the money that's available. And that's the thing, is that everyone always says, so many people, and I shouldn't say everyone, but so many people always say, oh, immigrants don't cost the country any money. Well, they absolutely do. And I think I'll use that to segue into the next part of this discussion, is that immigration does cost a nation money. A lot of people say, oh, they pay tax, they pay income tax, when they go to work, and the boss can still collect payroll tax. Well, but if he's handing that payroll over to the government, it has to be done under a tax identification code, and if they're sharing codes or if they're stealing social security numbers, that has a burden on whoever that tax code or social security number belongs to. No, most of the time what they'll do is they'll take out the payroll tax, or they'll just pay them under the table directly and then pocket the difference and not report it at all. If they're even going that far. Like I said, most of the time they usually just pay them under the table. I mean, I've lived in Alabama, and I lived in Arizona, and I've lived in South Florida, and you see this all the time. It's a lot worse than in Arizona than it is in Florida or Alabama, but certainly it's something that you see constantly, where they're going out and they're working under the table. They're waiting around at either Home Depot or a gas station or on some corner where there's some space, an empty lot for them to congregate. And then they'll get picked up by usually smaller entities, smaller contractors to go out and do a lot of things like roofing or tiling. which are not really the best jobs, and that's where you'll get the argument, oh, well, they're doing jobs Americans don't want. No, Americans want these jobs, they just don't want them at minimum wage because it's very difficult labor. And if there weren't an immigrant doing these jobs under the table, or some high school kids, like I used to do something like this when I was a kid, where I would work for a landscaper or something on the side, on the weekends or something, and get paid under the table. So it's not exclusively an immigrant issue, but it's their primary form of income, because they can't just go to Best Buy, which basically has to vet their employees. They're part of the Verify, E-Verify and all that. So what happens is they get paid under the table. That money's not going into the income tax system. Okay, when they spend it, they do pay sales tax. But the problem with sales tax is that sales tax is local. It'll fund things like local schools to some degree, fire departments, police. But a lot of the federal subsidies that go to schools and hospitals and infrastructure, those don't get paid by your local sales tax. Those only get paid by income tax and property tax, and certainly immigrants aren't paying any of those. In fact, a heavy immigrant population can bring down property value, which depresses property tax, further limiting the amount of money going into the system. Now, this is one of the reasons why a lot of these things shouldn't necessarily be getting all these subsidies, because if they weren't, and you had an immigrant crisis, then you wouldn't have the financial burden that comes along with it. Now, that being said, I say that a lot. I should try to watch some of these things that I do all the time. Now that I've called it out, everyone's gonna put in the comments. By everyone, I mean my one subscriber. But hopefully someday someone from the future will come back and watch this, because I've built an audience. Will then point out how many times I say this in every video or something like that. But that being said, what can we do about the current immigration crisis? Well, we can look at what they've done in the past. Mass deportation has never really been the modus operandum, even under Obama, who deported allegedly the most immigrants. I don't have stats in front of me, but you hear that a lot. Even if it's true, though, that's not been the majority of immigrants. So that's never really been tried. We have tried waves of amnesty in the past. I believe we did them in the 80s, and I think there was another wave of them under Clinton, saying, okay, well, we're going to do this wave of amnesty, and then we're not going to do it anymore. So, we're just trying to legitimize the people that are here and, put a stop to this problem where now they're paying taxes and everything's fine. But they've never been really coupled with the sort of border defense measures that would really stop the problem. Because if you grant a bunch of immigrants amnesty, then it just shows the immigrants who aren't here yet, well, we could go grab us a piece of that amnesty next time another one of these waves gets pushed through, especially after you've pushed through two waves. If they only pushed through the first wave of amnesty and then said never again, and they still hadn't done it again, I could see the argument, well, but it works because they did it once and that was it. But even then, if the immigrants are still coming, you could argue, well, it doesn't really work, they're still coming, and then if they've done a second wave, then what's to stop a third wave or a fourth wave? And I know that's a bit of a slippery slope argument, but the thing about this particular slippery slope is we're not talking about it from a policy perspective. We're talking about it from the immigrant's perspective. And it's very easy for people to fall into believing the slippery slope argument. So from their perspective, they see this happen, more than once already. Oh, it'll probably happen again. All I need to do is get there and just hunker down until I get this wave of amnesty. Oh, they're talking about giving kids this amnesty under whatever program, DACA or whatever. Let's say I go there, I get caught, but at least my kid gets to stay and they get citizenship. Then maybe I can work my way in later. And so, you have all these incentives that come because the idea that you could just be randomly lotteried citizenship seems to be something that is very much on the table and for real. And now you have the president-elect, well, he hasn't been elected yet, but the front runner of the Mexican election. I keep pausing because I'm trying not to cough in your ear, sorry. So we see this front runner of the Mexican election saying, go to America. I'll fix Mexico while you're gone, and then you can come back later. I mean, that's essentially sanctioning an invasion of America. It's just a civilian invasion instead of an army invasion. I've always made the joke, if China wanted to conquer any country in the world, announce that they're coming and just load cargo planes full of civilians, because pretty much any European or Western country will not shoot them down. And then you could drop millions, if not a billion people into a foreign country and completely obliterate its economy, even if they didn't have a welfare system. And so the idea that you can weaponize your civilian population, I think, is a very real thing. And for the first time, certainly that I can think of, they've certainly decided that this is the route they're going to go and exercise this practice in Mexico, if that's the way their government is headed. Now, that being said, this doesn't mean that the people in Mexico don't have, rights or whatever. Because he was saying, it's a human right to go to America. Well, I mean, it's not a right that America recognizes, but we do recognize rights. I mean, we don't declare, that Americans have certain rights. We declare that there are certain rights that are self-evident, meaning that all people, essentially, under that philosophy, have these rights, and they need to be, or should be, defended. Not necessarily that they need to be defended by America. And, sometimes you'll see out there these people, and even in my subscriptions, you'll see Stefan Molyneux among them talk about, national IQ or racial IQ or anything. I don't see where that really makes a difference. It doesn't matter what your IQ is. If you're still human, you still have an equal right to human rights. So don't misunderstand me saying that we should defend our national border, our national culture, as saying that we need to be denying people their human rights. But staying in Mexico isn't a violation of your rights. Having your rights violated by the Mexican government is. Don't blame the people, blame the power, essentially. And if it's going to start affecting us, and I touched on this in the last video, if the immigrant crisis is affecting us because of things that Mexico are doing, then I think that justifies us to intervene in Mexico. I do generally agree in non-intervention. When you have a country, that's how you get diversity, is you have different cultures that exist and are allowed to sort of figure things out for themselves. So I don't believe in intervention unless it's affecting you, or unless it's just such an abhorrent human rights violation that, it's, like the Holocaust or something. Then I can definitely justify, well, it's not affecting us, so it doesn't matter. That's horrible enough. You've crossed the line where I don't think as fellow human beings we can justify it. Like, same in, say, North Korea. But Mexico, I don't think they've really crossed that line. But so if I was in England, I would say, well, let the Mexican leave the Mexican. We don't need to get involved in Mexico. But I'm in America and it affects us, so I do think we need to get involved. If we did blanket amnesty, that's going to cause a lot of issues where people who shouldn't be getting amnesty, drug dealers and criminals, will be essentially Americanized, and that's going to put a weight on our criminal justice system. It's going to cause civil unrest with people being like, well, my niece, nephew, son, brother, wife, whatever, has been murdered by this, amnestized, is that a word, amnestized? Well, it is for the purposes of this video. This amnestized citizen of the United States who was a criminal. Like, why did the government do this to us? If you do mass deportation, you're going to see a huge outcry of people saying, like, oh, what heartless bastards, you're deporting families, these people speak English, etc., etc. But this, I think, is sort of a Band-Aid situation. Either way we go, there's going to be, it's like you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Either plan is going to offend people. I'd rather take the road of deportation personally, just because I think it's better for our culture, and it sends a message where amnesty kind of sends a message that no, just come here, it'll be fine. Additionally, I don't think you could get amnesty without getting a lot of concessions on border security that the left doesn't seem willing to give up. where mass deportation is essentially on the books now. It's just not being enforced. So I feel like that's a more likely outcome, but it's going to cost whatever party pushes that platform, and let's face it, right now, it's the right pushing the platform of deportation. They're going to take a hit. It'll probably, if it really went down, it would cost them the executive office if they held it, or if they were had sort of a lame duck sort of situation where Congress could overrule the president. I think that would also cost a lot of senators their seats and probably re-elect that president or get the Democrats a second president in a row, leading to a potential 16-year situation of Democrat rule. So the cost is pretty high politically for deportation. It's not as high, I don't think, for amnesty, but it's still pretty high in the that it doesn't solve anything without getting that security, and I don't think the left is willing to give that up. So it'd be very difficult, is basically what I'm saying. So that's the situation as I see it. I mean, I'm glad to see that Trump isn't just going to use these people as political pawns, that he will sign an executive order. From a character perspective, that gives me a little bit of hope, but the problem is, of course, that it's not what the executive branch should be doing. It is technically abuse of powers. Same with net neutrality. Net neutrality was another case where yeah, maybe that's the good guy thing to do, to sign that executive order, but that's not what executive orders are for. That's not what you should be doing. That's an abuse of power, etc., etc. Congress, at the end of the day, needs to get off their ass and do their job. And that's the real problem. Now, going back to what I said about Congress, I think that one of the things to remember is that anytime you do something, because right now the polls are showing that Americans are in favor of deportation slightly more than amnesty. But remember, anytime you do something, you're going to rally the people that object to it more than you rally the people that are in favor of it. So even if the majority is in favor of it, if you start doing this, you're going to rally the left, and that's why it's going to cost you an election. Not just because, not because there are more of them necessarily, but whatever action will embolden the other side to come out and seek change. And that's kind of gets into the whole political pendulum swing sort of situation. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on, because I actually had, quote, finished this video, and then I listened to it and saw some things that I had left out, is that cultural integration, I think, is really important. I think that you need to have a cohesive culture, and it's okay to have a cohesive culture. And I think right now that sort of sentiment upsets people on the left. They're like, oh, that's racist. No, that's culture versus culture. For example, in South America, where they used to sacrifice people to the rain gods, we would say, well, that's an inferior moral position. That's not a good thing to be doing to your culture. It spreads fear. We would say that American culture is superior to that ancient Aztec culture. So there is such a thing as cultural superiority. It's just unfortunate that a lot of cultures follow racial lines, and this gets misconstrued as racial equality or inequality. But there is such a thing as cultural equality or inequality. And that's not a bad thing. Different cultures are different approaches to dealing with things like spirituality and economics and religion and all of that. Well, spirituality is religion, but ethics and morals and philosophy. So a diversity of culture is good. And whatever culture you most identify with, the very act of identifying with a culture is saying that you feel that particular culture is superior. At least in for you, it fits you what you think is right. And I see I'm getting into the weeds here. I want to make a whole video about this, so I think I'm not going to get into it much further. The point is that for a functioning nation, and nations require organization, there does need to be some kind of cohesion. Absolutely absorb the good traits, the great things from other cultures, the great innovations from culturally compatible ideologies, like Cinco de Mayo, honoring the dead, like your relatives. Like, we don't really have an American holiday like that. We have like Memorial Day for, soldiers, but we don't have a day dedicated to honoring our ancestry. So, for example, that would be something like really positive that we could absorb from Central American culture. Certainly Mexican food is delicious. I know that's kind of a joke that people throw out there, like, but if you deport them, you won't have any more good burritos. But no, like diversity of food for both nutritional and just sort of like luxury, like quality of life purposes, that's very good. It makes your population happier the more, well, at least it seems to in America, the more diversity of food you have. Like I said, Cinco de Mayo is like a great thing that really helps. I'd like to actually see America get more involved with, sports like soccer, because it's really like part of a global community that like the U.S. has opted out of, and I feel like it would actually benefit us to participate more in a larger global community. So don't misunderstand me when I'm saying, oh, well, there's such a thing as cultural superiority, that I think that we should just obliterate all inferior cultures, by which I mean all other cultures. Like, absolutely not. I think other cultures should be allowed to exist and flourish, and they're going to do certain things better than us. But I still think that our ideology of freedom and liberty and, being able to take in people from diverse backgrounds and spiritualities and live together in harmony, where we don't have a state religion and everything. Like, I think those principles are out of what's available in terms of governments. Might not be the ultimate in my mind of what we would like to be doing as humans, but I think it's the best option that we have, which is why I'm not getting on a bus to move to Canada or something. So, that being said, I feel like our culture is a superior culture. We still have things we can learn, and that we do need to defend it, though. That we need to make sure that we're not bringing in people, and not just from Mexico, but from other places. We don't want to bring in people that aren't going to integrate, that are going to push, sweeping reforms, if they get citizenship, to move in a more like socialistic direction or authoritarian direction. We need people that speak the language, that are able to, work with us, and that they can participate in our culture in a meaningful and beneficial way, both for us and for them. All right, so a little over 20 minutes, but that's just how it's going to be this time. All right, I'll see you guys later.